Our speaker, Jim Monahan, has worked for over 30 years in hospice and palliative care. Does everybody know the difference between hospice and palliative care? Yeah, you worked in one. What's the difference? What's the difference? Uh-huh.
Yeah.
It's not going to cure you. Yeah. But another difference is that when Medicare decided to start covering hospice, they stole the name, and they said nobody who's not a Medicare hospice is allowed to use the word hospice. And they polled the existing hospices and said, how long do your patients generally stay? And the hospices answered, the average is 6 months. And therefore, when you go into hospice, a Medicare hospice, you have a 6-month stay. Now, it can be re-upped, but where I come from, average means half the people are longer and half the people are shorter. So the average amount of time people are in hospice today is 2 weeks because they don't think of signing up until they're ready to say, I'm ready to die. And that's a real shame because it's got a lot of wonderful care that they can give. Anyway, off the topic. Jim has focused on enabling African Americans, veterans, and rural residents to make informed decisions about end-of-life choices. He has delivered addresses in many countries, produced webinars, and published articles on grief and loss. He recently wrote The Significance of Political Grief, an examination through major global events in the journal Omega. And if anybody's interested, I have a copy. It'll be on the little table in the social hall. His talk today is about understanding political grief.
Thank you, Susan. Good. It's really good to be here today. If I could light one more candle, it would be a candle of gratitude that we could be together and express and talk about our joys and sorrows, talk about topics such as this. This is a different place in a good way. You know, my wife said to me as we were up there, I was over there dancing, as people were dancing, imagine somebody from another church walks in now, we're all dancing with this great music. How different. And you'll notice that I got off the platform to dance because years ago my wife said, don't dance in public. For a very good reason, lack of rhythm. And if you notice that there's a song that people are clapping along, I'm like this. I have a 180-degree clap. So I keep my hands like this so I don't embarrass myself and my wife. So my wife and I, Kathleen and I, attended this church years ago. We were members, or so we thought. That's a whole other story. And after a number of years, we moved to Hawaii, then back to Texas, and we're back again. We bought a house, and we're attending this church for great reasons. I mean, just feel the room. That's why we come. The messages, not saying this one today, but the messages in general from Peter and other speakers, the great music. It's a good place to be, to get centered, to be acknowledged, to understand. I'm not a minister. I've played one, not on purpose though. I've done a few weddings, believe it or not, but the people got married by a justice of the peace first. Then they wanted the spiritual ceremony, so I did that. Done a few funerals. The most touching is when I was asked by the person before they died if I would do their funeral. Then other times by family members. And I've done a few, I guess, sermons, talks like this at a service. One that comes to mind was a number of years ago in Orlando. I was working at a large nonprofit hospice, and the chairman of the board was a Lutheran minister, a pastor of a church. And it was going to be Thanksgiving time, and there was an annual event where 5 or 6 churches got together for a Thanksgiving service. They had a bell choir, and it was a big thing. And he called me, he said, Jim, would you come and talk about hospice? I said, at a church service? He says, every year we sponsor or we feature a nonprofit. We'd like you to talk about the hospice. I said, okay. So I got some notes together, and Kathleen and I went up to the church and met the pastor and his wife. And we started to walk in, and he says, no, Jim, you come with us. Kathleen, you go with the others who are accompanying the pastors, mostly wives and some husbands and partners, I guess. And so I said, okay. He says, you're sitting up here on the stage. I said, really? I am? Kind of like today, I am. And he said, yeah, you're doing the sermon. I said, I am? And he said, yes, read the order of service. Sermon, Jim Monahan. I said, okay. It's a new one to me. But, you keep on going. So I got up there and I did the talk about hospice, and it was a very beautiful church. I don't know what it's called, but where the person does the sermon, it looks like the bow of a ship. You walk up steps and you're up there and like, whoa. So I'm going through this about hospice, and I felt like I was connecting, and people were smiling and crying and all the good things you get from hospice talks. And finally I'm realizing I'm in this large Christian service with people in 5 or 6 churches. I haven't even mentioned God once. And I said, ooh, what can I do? Thinking as I'm talking. So to wrap it up, I said, we're thinking about hospice, we're thinking about death and dying, maybe the death of others close to us, our own death. We really brings our thoughts to the place that life is not indefinite. It is going to happen. What can we do? So I'm thinking, here's my chance to get God in. And I said, I have a mug my mother gave me. And every morning when I have coffee, I read it. And it says, this is the day the Lord hath made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. I think I got an ovation then. Good. Maybe because God was in it. I don't know. But one good thing about UU is I don't have to wear a suit like I did that night, and I don't have to mention God, but I can. So I don't know if I will, we'll see. Next slide, please, Crystal. Talking about political grief. You can go to the next slide. I want to tell you how I got interested in this. I belong to a group called the International Work Group on Death, Dying, and Bereavement. It's a group of probably 150 people from 22 countries around the world. We meet somewhere in the world every 18 months. And we had a meeting in Norway, and I joined a group there. And it's not like a conference. You stay with the same group for 6 days, and you develop the topic. So I went into the sociology group, and we talked about political grief. And we developed a presentation that we gave to the others, and then we published it. And it's in the journal Omega. I'm sure everybody reads it, Journal of Death Studies. And it came out, and the group was composed of people from Singapore, Wales, the Netherlands, Canada, US, all over. There were probably 10 or 12 of us in the group. Darcy Harris was a member. She's a professor at a university in Canada. She's published on it before, so she kind of guided us through. Have the next slide, please. I don't have a clicker here, so. Because we were international, we didn't just look at what was going on in the United States, which kind of broadened our mind and broadened our thinking, which I think helps. If we feel like we're the only one, it gets worse. So we talked about colonialism, the Holocaust, Brexit, China, including Hong Kong and the situation with the Uyghurs, Afghanistan, troubles in Northern Ireland, and so on. So we could see we're not alone in these political things that happen. Okay. We talked about underlying mechanisms for this, social inequities, oppression, alienation, apathy, displacement, disparities, things that bring problems and make them stronger and bring them out even more. So, since then, well, let's just get into political grief. Can I have the next slide, please, Crystal? Let's talk about first grief, then politics, and then we'll bring them together. What is grief? We'll have another pop quiz. I won't ask Donna, but if I asked everybody in the room, we'll probably have that many definitions. Most people say grief is what happens when somebody dies, but as we know, it can be from any loss. Next slide, please. Losses such as divorce, the loss of a job, moving where we live, children moving out of the house, children moving back in the house, promotion, You know, I have weird friends. We talk about grief and loss and things that bring it about. A job promotion, can that bring about grief? Yeah. Can't talk about the same things with the same people. That feeling like I don't know what I'm doing for a while or forever in the new role. So it's just any change, really. Health, changes in religious beliefs, cars stolen or totaled. Now that could be a blessing too. There could be no grief. When my mother-in-law's car was totaled, we were thinking how could we have the conversation about not driving anymore. And there was a divine intervention and somebody totaled her car and nobody was hurt. So she was relieved, my mother-in-law, I think, and we sure were, because you know that wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. So it's not always grief. Any event doesn't always bring about grief. So really, I think any change. Next slide, please. The definition that I use for grief, and I've been using it for quite a while, and I think it really fits with political grief. Grief is the reaction to the perception of loss. And for me, the key words are reaction and perception. You know, it's a reaction. Grief is not an emotion, but a bundle of emotions. A reaction is it happens after an action. Something happens and we react to it. So there's a loss in our mind, because that's the perception. Same example of the car. It's not always seen as a loss. In political grief, actions that are happening are not always seen as bad, negative losses. About 50% of the people might not agree with the same things we do. So grief is the reaction to the perception of loss. So keep that in mind. Next slide. Politics. I went back and forth on this, did a lot of searching, came up with a pretty good definition. It's theoretically, politics involves the collective decision-making process that establishes rules, laws maybe, company policies, allocates resources, addresses societal issues by hopefully balancing diverse interests and viewpoints across all levels of society, or the country, or the company, or whatever it might be, the church. That's what it's supposed to be. I think it's a little off kilter right now. And when we lose the political process, the democratic process in our case, in this country, state, city, that's a big loss right there in itself. Never mind all the other losses that are accompanying that we're going to be grieving. So that's what politics are. So what's political grief? Next slide, please. Oh, you're right there. It's the reaction, it's the grief that we feel. It's emotional, physical, spiritual, behavioral response to perceived losses resulting from political decisions and actions. We all react to those things negatively or positively with reactions. Feelings could be, that's good, or oh, I can't believe it, or I don't want to turn on the news, or can you believe what's happening now, or finally they're coming to their senses. So we all react differently. And that's why it's so difficult. It's not the same reaction. This causes a sense of insecurity. And what's different with the political grief, I think, than other forms of grief, although not always, is political grief could cause rifts, separations, hard feelings, animosity between friends, acquaintances, family members. You know, and that's another loss there. If we lose somebody we have in a relationship, there's more grief with that. So it's grief upon grief. So next slide, please. It can and it is experience grief from the many losses that go into political grief. The loss of our rights and freedom, economic hardships. Susan mentioned people losing their jobs, social injustice, maybe not to us directly, but people we know, people we don't know, and that impacts us, and we're going to feel the grief there. Environmental destruction, public health crisis, won't even go there. Conflict and violence that we read, potential conflict and violence, and our sense of safety is lost. You know, so all of those things are part of political grief and the reasons we grieve. Next slide, please. So, if we weren't in this setting, I'd be saying any questions, any comments, any feedbacks, but we won't do that. We can stand around later and do that if you like. You know, political grief has far-reaching effects on people, on communities, influencing our social dynamics, economic opportunities, and our well-being. You know, I was listening to something on NPR on the way over, and the man was saying, I don't post things like I used to. In my class at university, I don't teach the way I used to. I noticed myself, I've not used Facebook in a long time, but if I did, I wouldn't be writing like I did. You know, I have two good friends, and we text probably at least a dozen times a week. I knew the three of them from two of them from another hospice, and we don't post anything about what's going on in the world. Text, you know, one's a physician, one's a high-level IT guy, and we're just don't trust ourselves or others. So it's widespread. So let's go to the next slide, please. Yeah, this is it. This is, I downloaded this from the Internet Associated Press. This is Jen, and she was working as a ranger in Alaska. And during one of the first waves of layoffs, she lost her job. It was a job she loved. And she said, my life is disintegrating because I can't work in my chosen field. She said, lumped up on top of no support from family, and it hits you hard. She went home, and her mother, a former federal employee, said, I support the president. So where you would get your support is not there. You know, this is a big problem. You know, a big problem is part of it. The next slide, I think I have him there. I guess I don't have his picture, but somebody else said, it's a man named Luke. I've been treated as a public enemy by the government. It's bleeding into my own family. He's 24 years old. He was fired last month from his job as a technician with the Forest Service in Idaho. They can't separate their ideology and their politics from supporting their own family and their own loved ones. More losses on top of losses. Loss of a job is tough enough, but loss of support when you go home. So, what are we going to do? I have a few ideas. Talk's not over. Good. So, let's look at the next slide, please. Some strategies, some things we can do. And we can go to the next one. I'm going to sound like a counselor here, and I used to work as a licensed counselor. Discuss your feelings, your hopelessness with a trusted friend, a family member, somebody that you can talk to. Find YouTube. Just go on YouTube. If you don't, go in there and look it over. And you can find a lot of politicians saying things that will make you feel good that aren't making the news because they're not radical enough. But we'll watch, won't mention any names, and we'll go, oh, good, at least somebody in the government's doing something now. So look for people with like-minded thoughts in YouTube or Comedy Central, wherever, something just to lighten it up a little bit. Then look online for gatherings. I don't know of any of like-minded people to discuss. Whichever side of the fence or the wall that you're on, look for it. And if we could start one like that, let's sit and talk about our fears and hopes. Look online for hopefully peaceful gatherings with other people. I said that. And tune out for part of the day or all of the day. Put your phone, maybe just so it'll ring if somebody calls, but don't look at the news. Don't have the pop-up ding in the morning to wake you up with the great news from overnight that you might have missed. Just get away from it for a little while. You know, I talked about talking to people. Kathleen and I had an experience back in Houston. Our next door neighbor had very different views than we did. And many times when we'd run into her, she would start to indoctrinate us, so she thought. And so we were taking the long way home sometimes. But one time she caught us. We shared the yard. And we were out there for almost an hour. And we followed up, and she came into our house for the first time. And we listened, and she listened. And we walked away saying, wow, that felt good. Not that either any three of us changed our mind, but we felt like we understood, her and why, and her history and what brought her to believe these things. And after that, it was a pleasure to see her. I've even sent her a few texts since we moved back here, saying things are good here. Stay there. No, I didn't say that. And avoid websites and news channels that may be inflaming the situation, because those are the ones that are out there and getting your attention. Hope and pray. If nothing else works, hope and pray, or meditate in your own way. Next slide. You know, I think if I ask for a show of hands, how many people here have somebody in their family who believes a bit differently? I might get quite a few hands coming up. Yeah, our hands are up. You know, we don't talk about these things when we go to one person's house. You know, we used to. Nobody's going to convince anyway, so we're just dance around it. You know, we come from a dysfunctional family, so we're used to doing these things anyway. You know, or set boundaries before or after, and then decide who you're going to talk to about the news. You know, family, coworker, friend, neighbor, and even, I think this is important, like we had that, we didn't plan it or set it up with our next door neighbor, but see if there is somebody that you can talk to who you think believes very differently. And see, and you know, if the conversation starts going, go in with an open mind. You know, I would suggest don't start with a family member. Don't start with somebody at work because you're going to have to see them again. But, you know, somebody, a very neutral person in your life who you can tell, you know. And it's probably easy to find them, but try that, you know, and go in, seek to understand, not to change. And see, you know, you might say, wow, okay, now I understand why those people are this way a little bit more. Engage in unrelated community activities. You know, I have a friend who lives here, and she started volunteering with a group completely unrelated to any of this stuff. But she feels like she's making a contribution. It gets her out of the house. She feels happy with people doing the same kind of work. So maybe find volunteer work, maybe at the church. Maybe there's something here. Who's taking names today? For volunteers, Crystal in the back. You know, do something unrelated to the things that bring about political grief, just to broaden our worlds, because we live in this world of the news coming at us, and that's what's causing it. And every once in a while, feel it. Don't fight it. You know, when we talk to people who had a loved one die, we say every once in a while, give in to the feelings. Cry, scream, yell, you know. Do that with this. Make sure you're not in Kroger or Publix at the time, but it might happen. So that's some ways of building resilience and coping. Next slide. Practice, if you don't, mindfulness, meditation, just to relax, you know, just to, because, you know, we carry this political grief all over our bodies and our minds. Talk about community engagement, and find and develop support networks. You know, people you can get together with who you can talk about these things and will listen and won't try to say things like, you know, it happens all the time, or it happens in other countries, or, you know, it'll be over soon, so it's not necessarily true. Next slide. So you know, what I'm talking about now is just giving into it, broadening our life around it, not having it run us. You know, channel the grief into action. I won't stand here and say join a demonstration, because that might not be safe. Maybe join a demonstration from 3 blocks away and inch your way in, but I don't know how safe that would be even. You know, and when we do something to talk about the issues within political grief, not just political grief, but the issues, we're an advocate to make change. And that's what we want to do in this. And when we can feel we're changing just a little bit, we're going to feel good, just a little bit. We're not going to change the whole thing. Next slide, please. I developed this, and some people have called it Monahan's model because there's a million other models of grief, and they were kind of joking with me, so I joked back and put that on there. Whenever we're grieving, I see 3 things to get through the grief, not to get away with it, but to accommodate to living in the world without whatever we're grieving. One is to understand it, and that's to understand grief itself, that what we're experiencing with political grief is grief. To understand if we're grieving due to a death or a disease, the factors that go into it. So as much as we can understand our reaction in this situation, that's going to help. To process it, that means to talk about it, if you draw, if you play the piano beautifully, if you sing, to do that and get it out. You know, years ago I had a friend in Orlando whose husband died, and she was a hospice nurse, and he was big with the Audubon Society, and they had a big memorial service, and they released a rehabilitated bald eagle, American eagle, in his honor. And that was expressing it. You know, when his daughters were choreographers, and they wrote a dance for their dad. That was expressing it. So express this grief somehow. Just don't hold it in. And the last thing here is to validate it. That means to acknowledge how horrible it is. When somebody dies, we have these cliches and platitudes. He's in a better place, at least he's not suffering. With political grief, we can, what's the opposite of validate? Minimize it by saying to ourselves even, well, am I middle-aged, upper middle-aged white male? They're probably not going to come and get me. Or my neighborhood is safe. Or I'm not on Medicaid, what do I have to worry about? That's minimizing it. To validate it, to say how horrible it is, that what's going on to other people around us. So just to say, yeah, this is pretty bad. Every once in a while we have to use those cliches to take the edge off it, but to acknowledge how difficult it is. There's a set of principles that I think are pretty good. You might agree with me. They're principles to live by, and if the world followed them, I think this world would be a little bit of a better place with political grief and other things going on. I'm not going to go into that. I think Pete will do that next Sunday. But if you think about, validating somebody's inherent worth, working for justice, equity, compassion, accepting one another, I wouldn't be up here talking. Could be no such thing as political grief. So let's dig deeper into our principles. Every Sunday I come and Kathleen comes, we listen to the words and the music, we listen to Peter, we listen to the other speakers, and since I knew I was doing this talk, I think everything I heard works to help political grief. Everything that this UU church does goes to address it. So dig into UU Jacks. Not saying dig into your pocket, but some people here wouldn't mind. But dig into the beliefs and work this way. It works. So to conclude, next slide. I'm going to conclude with two quotes. One, I'm kind of surprised that I'm quoting this person, but I've opened my mind and listened to him on TV, then read him on the internet, and I was very biased and naive and working with a closed mind that I've opened a little bit, just one place. And it's the Republican governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, talking after the shooting of Charlie Kirk. And he said, in remarks aimed at a group of young people, "You're inheriting a country where politics feel like rage. It feels like rage is the only option." That's to young people, but we got this world. We're not inheriting it, so we feel that too. Your generation has an opportunity to build a culture that's very different than what we're suffering through right now. Not by pretending differences don't matter, but by embracing our differences and having those hard conversations. That's what's going to help us get through this. The second one I'll quote, I'm not surprised, and you probably know this quote better than I, Mother Teresa. "None of us, including me, ever do great things, but we can all do small things with great love, and together we can do something wonderful." So next time we meet somebody with opposing views, listen, talk, try to understand, try to make some changes out there, and we will, just a platitude or a cliche, get through this together. But just let's address it and do something. Thank you for being here today.